Okay, can I just add my voice and thank the organizers and Barry for including the artists in this workshop and also for a wonderful curated exhibition. I was really quite hesitant about giving this talk because I sort of thought, what is it that I can say as an artist that will be of interest to you, until I was having this brief conversation with Andre, and I was saying to him, like, as an artist, my struggle is trying to represent a three-dimensional form or space on a two-dimensional surface. And he said, well, this is it. If you just talk about that, that will be of interest. So this is how I built my talk anyway. Just by way of introduction, I was a scientist. I did my PhD in reproductive biology and worked as a medical researcher in the medical school of the University of Edinburgh for about 15 years. And then I gave that career up to pursue my passion for art. I studied drawing and painting at the Leith School of Art in Edinburgh, and then I went and did an MFA in New York. And I'm predominantly a painter and printmaker, now residing in Cambridge. And I'm interested in the human figure, and I would say that my work is a constant struggle to subvert the specific with the aim of reaching something a little bit more universal. And there was a lot of talk in the morning about intent, and my feeling about that is really once I finish a piece, my intent with the work becomes irrelevant. I want the viewer to actually take my work into a different realm. I want them to continue the creative process. So this is why sometimes I'm a bit reluctant to actually say what the intention of my work is, because I feel like once I've done that, I've stopped the creative process. I've already given them the clues and they don't search beyond that. So I tried as hard as I can not to talk a lot about what my work is. So as I've said, the challenge is, how do you represent a three-dimensional form or space on a 2D image plane? And we do have a set of tool boxes that we use. We've got line, perspective, tone, and color. And I'm going to just very briefly go through those, and I hope they're not very elementary for many of you. So at a very basic level, if you take two lines, is there a pointer here? If you take two lines of varying length or varying thicknesses on a canvas, it immediately gives you a sense of space. Also, a diagonal line would immediately give you a receding sense of space. But other sort of tools that we have is the way we can place objects, shading of objects, overlapping objects would give you a sense of space, the size of objects and how they're arranged, the value or the tone. I should say that value and the tone are the same thing. In America, I think they use value. In Britain, we use tone. And whether the object is in focus or not in focus also can create a sense of space. There's linear perspective, obviously. And this is an example of a drawing by Cézanne. Thank you, Paul Cézanne, who's considered as the father of modernism, and he really very beautifully used a lot of these techniques. You know, you can see here the placement of the objects is giving you a sense of space, but also the focus. The ones in the top, they're not really as well focused, so they tend to recede a little bit. And artists are sort of interested in the realist tradition, you know, representational artists. We are interested in light, how light falls in an object, and how that helps create form so that we can see the shape. So in this image, for example, you can see clearly that the light is coming from the right over here. So as it hits the object, there's the highlight, and that's the sort of strongest lit area. There's a light zone and a shadow. It'll help me if I can actually point.
There is a pointer there.
Yeah. So there's a light mass over here and a shadow mass. And there's also what we call the half tones. These are sort of the transition areas, and these are really the most interesting areas for a painter over here. There's a lot going on within these half tones. Within the shadow mass, we have what we call the shadow core, and this is the darkest point within the shadow mass. And there's also the reflected light, and this is light bouncing off from around the object back into the object, and that helps create the curvature, if you want. There's the cast shadow, and there's also the accent, and the accent is usually the darkest point. This is the point of contact between the object and whatever it's laying on. And so if I take that into the human figure, it's the same principles again. You know, if you look at this classical figure drawing, there is the light coming from the right over here. There's the light mass, and there's the shadow mass, the halftones or the transition areas. There's the reflected light, cast shadow, and also the accents. And as I was preparing this talk, I sort of started looking through my old drawings, and I discovered this drawing that I did many, many years ago. And it was quite interesting for me to find it again, because I don't work in this way at all now. But really, having undergone such rigorous training helps my practice now, because now I work totally from memory and my imagination. It really helps me visualize what the head would do in a particular lighting situation, or what the body would do. And this is a sort of a monoprint, really, that I did totally from memory or from my imagination, using predominantly tone to sort of highlight the form of the head with a little bit of color just around the head. And so the same principles in drawing also apply in painting. This is a self-portrait by Rembrandt. Again, a single light of source light from the right. You can see this is the light mass, and this is the shadow mass, and there's the reflected light over here. And more contemporary artists such as Taschen Schoenberg. This is a portrait of Stephen Hawking, who would be known to many of you, and many, I think there are quite a few Taschen Schoenberg paintings dotted around the colleges. He's basically interested in the same thing that Rembrandt is interested in, but obviously he's pushing the qualities of paint in a more modern and contemporary way. And also, this is another artist that I really love his work. He's a very young Italian artist, fairly well established now, Nicola Samori. Again, quite realist in his approach, but pushing the boundaries of pain and you know, self-expression, which I think is very exciting. And I put these just as a comparison, because although these would be classified as sort of representational artists, they're really not realist in any stretch of the imagination. Their work is more expressionist. It's a lot of it is a personal response both to color and to the thing that they or the subject that they're actually painting. This is Soutine. If you're interested in his work, there's a wonderful exhibition at the moment at the Courtauld Institute in London. And this is a portrait of Soutine by his friend at the time, Modigliani. And again, there's a wonderful exhibition of Modigliani at the Tate Modern at the moment. So what about color and its alluring qualities? This is a color palette or color wheel that I use in my studio. It highlights all the colors that can be available to me sort of on the market. Just to remind you, there's your primary colors, your secondary colors, and all sorts of variations in between, but also these wonderful tertiary sort of grade colors. And again, to remind you, color has a tonal value to it and also a temperature. And so, for example, talking about tone, yellow is the lightest color on the palette, and temperature, you know, you have your warm colors over here, the oranges, reds, and yellows, and you've got your cool colors. And so the tonality of color and the temperature of color can be used quite effectively to delineate or to shape form, if you want. And Monet was a brilliant master of color, and this is one of the examples of the Cathedral of Rouen that he did. He did so many of them in various color palettes, and this is really just complementary colors, yellows, oranges. Yellows, oranges, and blues, and he's relying predominantly on the temperature of color over here to actually give us the form. So if I actually take a black and white version of that painting, the whole thing becomes more flattened. You can see that here. And this is clearer in the bottom part of the painting. So this is just a cutout section from here, this area over here. And if I put the colored version versus the black and white version, you can see over here we can still actually clearly see sort of doorways and archways, and over here it's totally lost and mishmashed. So the temperature of color can be very effective in creating form. And this is, I put a drawing of his, but this is a painting of Cézanne. And over here, it really looks so simple, but he's actually using quite a complex set of techniques to give us depth within this painting, but also form. So, for example, the placement of objects is giving us depth, but also the tonality and the temperature of color. So the tonality within this apple over here, the yellow versus the red, light versus dark. The temperature, warm colors at the front, cool colors at the back, and also the intensity of colors. So intense colors tend to come forward. These are intense, very close to your primary colors, and tertiary colors over here, your ochres and browns, are pushed back. So this clearly illustrates how color can be manipulated to help give you three-dimensionality and form. And this is a painting of mine using very pared down palette, again complementary colors of reds and greens to create form within the figure, and also an ambiguous space. And if I put the black and white version of that, you can see that a lot of the form is actually lost, and this is clearly indicated in the hand over here. For example, I used the warm reds just to pull it forward from that hand, for example, so it sits forward, and that more or less gets very flattened if you take the color away. So how about the universal? What do I mean by the universal? How can we represent an individual or a figure, whether it's specific or abstracted, and still have allowed the viewer to actually be transported, taken into another dimension? And this sort of idea can be traced back across the millennia. For example, cave art. This is an example from Altamira, a cave in northern Spain. Dates to about 3,500 years ago. I think this is just as fresh and beautiful and transcendent, back then as it is now. Tribal art, African art, this is a mask from the Fang tribe in the Gabon, and this kind of art was really a huge source of inspiration for people like Picasso and Matisse. And more contemporary artist, Giacometti. Giacometti worked with a very small handful of subjects, sitters, his mother, his wife, and his brother Diego. This is one example of a portrait of his brother. But there's a quality about his work that is transcendent. It isn't about the individual anymore. The viewer can look at it and take it into another dimension, I believe. And more contemporary artists that I really admire a lot, Leon Kossoff and Frank Auerbach, again, I think they work with a handful of sitters, and sometimes in the case of Auerbach for decades, he's been painting the same sitter every week for about 40 years. I mean, this is just amazing, and he's interested in the physical changes of these people. But what I find exciting about these artists as well is that they really interested in the quality of paint. What can paint do, and how can it be transcendent on the canvas? And this is an example of Frank Auerbach. Right, back to earth. Having spoken about these people, what about my approach and my work? Obviously, I'm interested in the human figure. I'm interested in color and what color can do to mood, to form, to my mood, to the viewer's mood. When I'm painting largely from my imagination and from memory. I tried very hard to tap into my subconscious and my emotional state, if you want. And when I'm painting, I'm trying to establish a conversation between myself and the canvas, and ultimately between the canvas and the viewer, because once I finish, it has to be taken out of my studio in a way. I enjoy what oil paint can do. I enjoy surprise. I enjoy the unexpected, and because of that, I try to work with oil paint wet on wet before it dries. And what that does is that it helps create new colors that I would have never really dreamt of mixing myself on the palette. So sort of new colors can emerge on the canvas that I wouldn't have mixed myself. All of these images are from an exhibition, a solo exhibition I had in Edinburgh earlier in the year, in March. So in addition to painting, I also said that I'm a printmaker. I'm currently sort of doing a large project with a master etcher, doing sort of large-scale etchings. But before that, last year I did a series of about 20 stone lithographs. And this is basically one of the stones that I work on. I draw on the stone, and then the stone is processed, taken through sort of a series of chemical reactions so that the image is fixed on the stone, and then it's inked and put through the press and allows me to sort of make a limited edition out of those. So this is the image on the stone as it's being processed, if you want, using sort of wax pens, ink, and all sorts of other sort of oil-based material. And this is the print, basically once it's actually put through the press. And these set of lithographs that I did were exhibited in Beirut at the same gallery where I discovered Emma's work, and then we became friends after that. And they were also exhibited in Paris in June. And this is another one of the lithographs called Shibboleth. This was done largely from memory, but it was inspired by the exodus of refugees across the Mediterranean into Greece at the time. It was all this imagery that I was seeing on the TV sort of inspired me. So the other thing that I should stress is life drawing is very important for my practice. I try to do as much life drawing as possible because it helps me visualize the figure in all its complexities, how it sits, how it responds to light. And I try to work very fast when I'm doing life drawing. So this is an example of, this was done from life. It was done probably in 20 or 25 minutes, and I try and use sort of mixed media. This was oil bars, oil pastels, pencils, whatever I have at hand at the time. And there's an element of incompleteness about it, but I think that's part of the charm of these drawings because the pose was finished and I couldn't go back into it. And this is another sort of example. And this is a head that was started in a life drawing, and then it was completed from memory afterwards. Okay, the last part. So what about art and science? This workshop is about art and science, and I had a career both as an artist and as a scientist. And people always ask me, how does my scientific career somehow inform my artistic career? And it's a very, very difficult question to answer. I believe. But the more I delve into this, the more I'm convinced that the creative process is actually the same, irrespective of the discipline. But the set of tools that we have obviously are dependent on our discipline. So whether you're a scientist or you're an artist, you have to acquire a set of expertise that sometimes can take decades. But there is one thing to my mind that is different in art, or at least in the kind of art that I've been talking about that I'm interested in. And with that in mind, I just want to finish with a quote from a book called The White Book by a South Korean artist, Han Kang. I've just become very obsessed with her writing recently, and I read here. Last spring, someone asked me whether I'd had a particular experience when you were young which brought you close to sadness. So I believe that life experience is really quite important for the artist. It gives them a well from which to draw upon that helps them create work that can be more universal. So, thank you.
Perfect. Henry, thanks a lot for that. Sorry, thanks a lot. I'm sorry that these things are moving so quickly.